What the Tech is sponsored by Audible.com, the internet's leading provider of audiobooks, with more than 100,000 downloadable titles across all types of literature. For a free audiobook of your choice, go to audiblepodcast.com/Andrew. And by Stitcher Radio. Listen on the go via the Stitcher mobile app. For more information, go to stitcher.com/GFQ.
What the Tech?
Hey everybody, welcome to What the Tech, a holiday special edition, a end-of-year special edition of What the Tech. I'm Andrew Zarian, and here is my lifelong friend, like I said last week, Paul Thrott. How you doing, Paul?
I am well. Thank you.
I got a bunch of questions from people asking, are you and Paul really childhood friends? And I said, yes, we are. We grew up together.
This childish friends.
Yes, I grew up in the Boston area, and I moved down to New York, and Paul and I reconnected a couple years ago. Childish friends. You talk about nonsense. But we were outed this week, Paul, so I don't know if you want to come clean about our relationship. I bet that was a little awkward for you.
It was surprisingly awkward, actually.
For people who don't know, listen to Windows Weekly. Check out the end. Listen, I had a lot of fun. Apparently, though, I am a slut, according to Mr. Laporte.
Yep, you are.
I got so many messages, and it was so funny. I actually had just turned the show off. I was getting ready to leave the house, and I turned the show off, and my Twitter just went insane from people just calling me a slut over and over again. And I had no idea what had happened. So I turned the show on, and there it was. So it was a lot of fun. And Paul and I are now very uncomfortable with this. And Paul's face was great because you're like, yep, yeah, that's it.
I've never been accused of cheating before, but it was what I always imagined it would be like.
And I felt dirty. I felt really dirty.
I did too. It was very strange.
My wife was watching it. I played it for her afterwards, and she goes, she's Italian. She goes, "You're the gumad. You're the woman on the side in that relationship." And I said, "Yes, I am. I guess I am the gumad. I'm the younger, more exotic girlfriend." I could do magic tricks too, so that helps. But it's the end of the year. Every year we do a roundup of the best stuff from 2012 or the best thing from the year, the worst of the year, and then we do a what we hope for the coming new year. This week we're doing the worst stuff.
Leave it on a positive note.
Yeah, we have to. Because next week it'll probably be what we liked, and it'll turn into what it could have been. But this week, this is the one show that we get a ton of emails for. We get a ton of downloads for it. This is our most popular show every year when we do the worst of. And there was a lot of bad things that happened this year, a lot of big disappointments. We're going to go down our list. Paul has a couple on his list. I have mine. And then we have a couple from the viewers that I was actually shocked when I saw what people were disappointed in. By
the way, we should pay attention to the chat room, because as we do this, I suspect people are going to pipe in with something that we completely zoned on.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. I'm sure. So definitely we want the chat room to participate and to kind of say, like, hey, you totally missed this.
And it's going to be one of those, like, things. I'm sure there's going to be at least one of those.
So we'll start off with the one big one on my list and Paul's list, and that's RIM. I think that probably has to be the biggest crumble for any of these companies that we're going to talk about. Because if we look at where they were 2 years ago or 3 years ago to now, sure. I mean, it's night and day, and it's unbelievable how a company could fall behind so quickly.
It's funny. I guess they're the flip side to Apple's success, right? I mean, Apple rocketed right up the charts with the iPhone. I guess Android did too. And these guys just fell apart in a big way. And the interesting thing is, they fell apart in the same way that Symbian did. But of course, Symbian wasn't really being actively developed or pushed in any meaningful way during the same time period. I mean, it's just been such an epic collapse. And I think that there's a lesson to it, because that could happen, to other companies.
Well, let's look at Palm, right? Palm and RIM have a very similar structure. I mean, they were both enterprise. The smartphone market was mostly enterprise at that time when Trios were everywhere.
Yeah.
And Palm fell apart because they were not able to adapt. And I think they were totally blindsided by the iPhone. I don't think RIM was blindsided because RIM had a pretty decent market share at that point. Their problem was they had a 10-year plan and they stuck to that plan even though they needed to kind of move on faster than they were and develop faster. And I think that, what was that, Torch or Touch? The Torch was a pretty big fail for them.
Their first Touch, that was their first reaction to the iPad, right? This was the haptic. Is haptic feedback the right term when it kind of vibrates when you touch it? Is that haptic?
Is it haptic? I'm not too sure. It could be. Well, let's say it is. Who cares? Nobody knows what that word means anyway.
Yeah.
I'm just...
Or is that some kind of like Karbala type thing?
Like septic?
I don't even know.
It was a septic.
Yeah.
Like a septic tank. But with RIM, it's so fascinating to me because they were the go-to phone. And I'll give you a perfect example. I think if they made a phone, and I really have high hopes for BlackBerry 10, and I'm hoping it does really well because more competition the better. And there are a couple good features on these on this phone.
Except for what, you know what? I agree with that. Well, go on. I'm sorry, but let's get back to that.
No, I was going to say I think with BlackBerry 10 they have the ability to capture this market again because I do some IT work on the side, and I was talking to one of my buddies that works for a very large company. And they went over to iPhones, and they hate it because their email support on the iPhone is awful. iOS 6 and emails is still not good, and they all want their BlackBerries back. And these are not tech guys, you know?
Really?
And I was surprised, and I was really surprised by that. They're like, when is the new BlackBerry coming out? So,
you know, it's funny. In the last couple of weeks, RIM has gotten a lot of good press for this BlackBerry 10 thing, you know, which defies everything I know to be true about the tech industry. You know, it's just amazing, like that they're so down in the dumps, and yet they've gotten some good press, and so that's been unexpected. I'm almost at the point now where if I could just sort of inject a little bit of personal opinion into this, because the reason that RIM got on this list wasn't because I don't like RIM or I want them to fail or anything like that. I just feel like, you know, they're circling the drain. On the other hand, I actually think we're at the point now where a RIM renaissance, which would be pretty muted, right? They're not going to take 30% of the market or anything like that. But if RIM somehow magically got back to like 10% of the market, I actually think that would have kind of a negative effect on things because it would be an uncertainty, you know, that everyone I think would agree that Android and iPhone are pretty much it. And that maybe the question is whether there's room for a third ecosystem. And maybe right now we're thinking that could be Windows Phone. But when you add BlackBerry into the mix, I mean, I think there's kind of a bit of uncertainty that settles in at that point. It might be bad for the industry overall because I think that developers are already strained to come up with apps that run on
every
iPhone,
platform,
Android. Yeah. And then when you add Windows Phone to the mix, when you add a BlackBerry 10 now to the mix, you know, it gets back to the way things were before, you know, and whereas the natural progression of things is for consolidation to occur. You know, think about the way that the personal computer market was in the early 1980s. You had every company under the sun making computers: Commodore, Radio Shack, Atari, Apple, IBM jumped in there obviously, but you know, Compaq and all TI and all
and
these.
They had that proprietary, you know,
all proprietary. Yeah. You're right. So if you were an application developer at that time, a game maker, whatever it was, you had to kind of survey the market, which was always changing. Determined which of the platforms you'd support. There were always completely different architectures and software platforms, and you know, how do you do that? And you know, it's we're just kind of getting out of that right now in the smartphone market.
I was having this discussion with somebody about you know, BlackBerry. You know, the story is BlackBerry was 3 years too late, or 2 years too late, or a year too late with this product. With BlackBerry 10.
With BlackBerry 10, yeah.
But in a strange way, I would have to say this is the perfect time for BlackBerry 10 to come out, because if we go back 3 years ago, every phone that hit the market was dubbed a possible iPhone killer. And
yeah.
Palm is the perfect example of this. Palm put all their eggs in one basket. They were running out of money. They put this phone out. That wasn't an awful phone. I think if that phone had come out...
Actually, I think that platform was superior. They had it very early on. It was web development based, which was really smart. It just didn't take off. It was the Amiga, if you will, of the smartphone world.
But do you think it didn't take off because everybody said, "Oh, this is horrible. The iPhone is so much better"? Because at that point, everything was being compared to that. Now that whole notion that something is an iPhone killer is kind of gone.
So, of course it is, but you got to be careful not, and I don't mean you. I mean, one has to be careful not to rewrite history here, because the reason that everyone was writing about iPhone killers was because there was no precedent to suggest that the iPhone wouldn't get killed. You know, that Apple had kind of come out of nowhere with the iPhone. The expectation was that everyone was going to take this idea, run with it, and that Apple would find themselves in the same position that they did with the PC market, because that's what happened before. And so that was actually a fairly reasonable assumption, you know. Obviously, Android in some ways was the iPhone killer. Not that it killed the iPhone, but it obviously relegated it to second place. And so the iPhone has a very strong position going forward. It's never going to be number one. It's just the nature of the market. But nor will it be the 5% option like the Mac became in the PC world. So they're fine. I mean, it's fine. You know, I love Windows Phone, but there's a case to be made that maybe the smartphone market is better off with two big players, just because it allows everything to move forward. You know, the quality of the apps can go up. It's going to be easier on developers. They only have two platforms to think about, not 3 or 4, which would be horrible, I think.
Well, Android has suffered that for a long time because, listen, I'm an Android user, and the quality of the apps are not, up till now, I think now the development of these applications has gotten a lot better because they've been forced to get a lot better. But up until a year ago, I mean, the app quality from iOS to Android, it was night and day. I mean, you would have the same application and it wouldn't be unified across both platforms. It would be the experience was totally different. Totally different.
That's getting better.
Sure, now it is. I mean, now I think that it's gotten better.
It's getting so much better. Even today, just today, there was this is Google, so maybe this is an unfair thing, but Google had a little announcement. I'm not going to write about it. It's no big deal. But they released a new version of Google News, which is a web service for their tablets. And so if you not for their tablets, for all tablets. So for iPad, for the Nexus tablets, for Android tablets, and so forth. I haven't looked at it yet, but I looked at it I haven't looked at it on a tablet, but reading the blog post that they wrote about it, I thought, you know, it's kind of interesting that Google themselves, which makes Android, is targeting iPhone and Android as well with this release, right? This is not new release of Google News for Android. It's new release of Google News for tablets.
You're talking about Google Current, right?
No, I'm talking about Google News.
Google News is okay.
It's a web service, news.google.com.
Okay.
It's interesting. It's just interesting. Like it's like the inflection point. You know, you have these two big platforms. They're both a big deal. You support them. These web services look the same on both, or reasonably close to each other on both, and that's the baseline. You know, going forward, and it's a little thing, and it's one of many things. But you know, it's the type of thing that would be difficult to support if there were 12 platforms. You know, and it may 4 may be too much. It's just a thought. I love Windows Phone. I want it to succeed. I want it to be that third platform, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, right now it is the third platform.
Consolidation is the natural way of things.
I mean, right now it is the third platform. Can you see BlackBerry with BB10 surpassing Windows Phone?
Yeah, Windows Phone is on my list for this year.
Okay, so
yeah, absolutely. In fact,
for
Windows
what
Phone
reason
is
though?
run because the platform has never taken off in any meaningful way, and it is so ineptly run that it almost seems like these people are working from within to kill it. Like, I have never seen anything. The only thing that could be more inept than Windows Phone is when you add Nokia into the mix. It's like the perfect combination of like absolutely inept piled on top of inept.
Okay, you know, so why don't we go to Nokia? Why don't you tell us about Nokia? Because I'm curious about this. Why do you think they
Nokia
totally
is the
failed?
same thing, right? So from a unit sold perspective, from a market share perspective, Nokia is also circling the drain, right? That they have gone from, just like RIM, from a once. In fact, if you think about it, kind of the smartphone market has not been around for a long time, but in the short history of the smartphone market, the first generation, maybe not the first generation, but the pre-iPhone generation of smartphones, the market was split between two companies, RIM in the United States and Nokia everywhere else. That was the market, right? They were basically the same. It's just that RIM was the big deal in the US and maybe in Canada. So today, both of these companies are a complete non-event. Nokia just sold their corporate headquarters. I made a kind of a snarky joke about it, I think, on Twitter, where I said something like, the definition of success is when you don't even own the building that you work in.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy. That is insane. I mean, that's insane. That's just.
I mean, the whole thing with Nokia was
insane.
that. I mean, the last 10 years they've never had a dominant presence in the States.
No, they never have.
They never have, and I don't know what it is. And they make.
By the way,
decent
I
phones.
want to be really clear about this because Nokia makes excellent stuff. They make excellent hardware. They have arguably the best mapping service on earth. Some of their software is excellent as well. I was ecstatic when they backed Windows Phone. I thought at the time that it was the right decision for them because, as they argued at the time, they would have been just one of many players in Android, but with Windows Phone, they have a chance to chart the direction of the platform. It's just that they have done nothing.
I was going to say that.
No.
And if we go back to that announcement that they were partnering with Nokia, I honestly thought that the right move would be to have an exclusive partner for a long time with Nokia, have Nokia the official Windows Phone, and update it every year so that Nokia is like the iPhone for Windows Phone, and you put it on every platform. But it seems like something went wrong there because I honestly thought that Surface announcement should have been a Nokia device.
I know. If you think about the styling of the Lumia 800, 900, 920, that kind of unibody, I don't know what the material is, like a polycarbonate kind of a casing. And you think about a Surface-type tablet, but made of that design in that style. Look, basically just a big version of those Lumia phones as a tablet. It's if you love technology and you love good design and everything, it's hard not to get excited by something like that. That would be an excellent device potentially. Of course.
Yeah, but you know what I'm more excited for? I'm excited for the HTC device, the 8X.
The 8X, yeah.
I find that more of an exciting device than the Nokia, than the 920, and that's really wrong.
Yeah. So
because that's the flagship.
This is hard for me because I love Windows Phone. I really do. I prefer it. I use it. And yet, people come to me and they'll say, I want to get a smartphone. What do you think? And it's hard for me to tell people, normal people, to get Windows Phone. And I think that's an indication that something's wrong right there, because I really don't think anyone cares about this more than I do. But it's not right. It's not there, And so, for example, one of the neat things about the current generation of Windows Phone devices is that HTC came along and made this special design, and it's unique to Windows Phone, which is really kind of cool, and it's beautiful and everything. But when you look at all the devices, there's no one perfect device. I like some aspects of the smaller Nokia devices. I don't love the huge 920. I think it's too big and heavy, personally. But it's got that camera, which is incredible. It has the Nokia services, which are some of which are incredible, like Nokia Drive, for example, which is excellent. I like the design of, for whatever it's worth, of the HTC Windows Phone 8S, which we're not getting in the United States. In some ways, better than the 8X. I love the 8X, but it doesn't have expandable storage. Like all of these devices are compromised in some way. I use a Lumia 820, which is kind of a mid-market phone from them, a Windows Phone 8 device. It has a 5-megapixel camera, so it's not as good as the 8-megapixel or 8.9 you would get in the 920. But it's still an excellent camera, and I kind of like that body style. There's something about the size and the weight and just the feel of it that's nice, And so it's kind of a mess. I'm describing a mess.
Well, that describes the entire, Microsoft and the OEMs, their relationship. I think it's a mess all across the board because
and yes.
If we talk about another fail, and it's getting worse.
Right. Microsoft has always lived or died, largely lived by their partner strategy, and I'm starting to come around to this notion that this is, and I'm not claiming that Microsoft making a phone is what would solve this problem, that would fix it, but there is a lack of consistency that is only one of the many factors which is contributing to this problem, but the problem of Windows Phone, that is. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough. I really like the Windows Phone 8X. It's a great device. I'm not clear that it's enough, for there to be a great device. And obviously there are things about the 920 that are better, or things about the Nokia phones just in general that are better, like those Nokia apps and services. So it makes it hard. It makes it hard. There's no clear decision. Like, this is the one I've chosen. I like it. I'm comfortable with that decision. But my wife's got a phone contract coming up in January, and we've already had this sort of starter conversation about what kind of phone you want to get, and she's interested in the Windows Phone, but I kind of she will hold on to this thing for 2 years.
Yeah.
Do I feel comfortable giving her a Windows Phone and saying, here you go, here's 2 years of your life?
Maybe not.
Yeah.
To kind of touch on what we said before, and again, if you're just tuning in, this is the worst of 2012. So we're talking about products that we felt could have done better, or products that totally disappointed us in 2012. Yep. This is what the show is going to be today. Next week, we're going to do the best of, followed by, I think we're a week off because it's Christmas, because we got a day off at least here. And I believe the following week, we're going to do what we hope for the new year, because there's a lot to be hopeful for in 2013. I want to go into... And I think this is a good segue. We were talking about the relationship that Microsoft has with Nokia and how it kind of... who dropped the ball, I don't know. It could possibly be, Paul, that Nokia, for whatever reason, they don't understand the U.S. market.
Well, yeah.
And they don't know how to market a phone in the U.S. market. They don't know what we want, because it's totally different.
They just announced... what was the device they just announced? 620? No, is that the 620? The one with the kind of double color backs that you can have kind of a two-tone looking thing? Beautiful looking device. We're not going to get it here. They have all these phones that, like, each of them has this one bit that's nice. And it's like, can you just make a phone? Like they just have all these designs. Like it's too bad. It's just too bad.
So if we go into the Windows 8 portion, and this kind of happened later on in the year, so I was kind of hesitant to call it a fail or a lacklustered.
But it is a fail for 2012.
It is a fail for 2012.
I think you're fair to mention.
And
this.
I think the OEMs totally dropped the ball. The PC manufacturers totally dropped the ball with Windows 8, and I hate to say this, but I think they did a lot of damage over the last couple weeks. More damage than I thought they would do. Listen, I knew they wouldn't be able to pull it together, but I think they've totally screwed this up, because Windows 8, we all know what it is. I actually like it, but I think they totally dropped the ball on putting together computers that the public wants and people want. It's like they don't know. They're just it's this game of roulette. They're just putting everything out there and they're letting it spin, and whatever sells, that's going to be the device.
But it's funny, because what's going to be the device is not what sells. It's going to be the one everyone wants but can't get.
Yeah.
That is the exact opposite way of how it should be, and it's too bad. To be fair, I don't think you or I can say right now, this is the device that makes sense, or here are the 2 or 3 devices that make sense. Go forth and make these things. It's amazing to me that in this day and age, the companies making the devices have no idea what to make. It's crazy to me, and there is no perfect. It's just like the phones, there's nothing. I can't point to something and say, yeah, you got to get this. This is the one. It just isn't there. I don't know. The device I keep going back to again and again and again is not touch based. It's just a regular computer, and it's not because it's not touch based. It's just that the right touch based one hasn't come.
But I would imagine that they would have had enough time.
You think?
I mean, we have other devices. Like we're talking about things, companies that dropped the ball. I mean, you look at a company that kind of revived their tablet market from. Let's look at Android, for example. I voted Android in 2011. They did not understand tablets. They were all screwed up. They should have released. Google should have released their own Google tablet to kind of set the standard. There was nothing that I really wanted in 2011. 2012, they turned that around with one tablet. and that's a Nexus 7.
They turned it around to the tune that I almost think that non-Google tablets should be on this list too. That maybe those things have run their course.
I cannot understand, the OEMs have this much time to prepare. They do market studies and they test out, this is what people want and this is what they want and that's what they want, and they still were not able to get a unified experience. I'll give you one example. Somebody recently in my family bought a brand new laptop, and it's one of the lower end Windows 8 laptops, like $399. And the one thing that I was scared of, and I said this is going to totally cripple the experience, is a bad trackpad on this device. It's awful.
You're obsessed with the trackpad.
I am, and I'll tell you why. Because if you can't scroll side to side, it's not going to work for you. And they were complaining. They're like, "Oh, the mouse isn't moving." That's what they kept telling me. That's why they brought the laptop over. And I looked at it. It's a lower end Asus, and the trackpad is not great. And I'm thinking, the person isn't going to say, "Oh, you know what? It's the trackpad on the Asus." They're going to say, "Oh, Windows 8 sucks. I can't even use the mouse."
Yeah.
And that really affects the market. It's that whole Vista experience. You put Vista on a lower end computer. It's totally sluggish. You're running, 1 gig of RAM. And you're saying, "Oh, Windows Vista sucks." I would like to know what it's been like for them.
Like, this is going to be better.
When is this going to get better? When are they going to understand this? And I would like to get.
By the way, so it can only get better. Next year may be different, but like I said earlier, I think you were right to add that to this list, because this was a huge launch event that was like tunnel vision from months ago, barreling down the tracks like a train. And it's like that, when you're doing the fireworks and you get the joke firework that doesn't do anything and it kind of just fizzles out and you're all waiting for something to happen. I mean, everyone knew this day was coming.
I really hope, really hope. And the only thing, in my opinion, that'll kind of fix this is if Microsoft turns around and says, "You know what, you guys really dropped the ball on this. We're going to team up with one OEM and they're going to make the Microsoft Windows 8, laptop or desktop. And you guys could follow and you see how it is. And if that starts selling, you know what? People will go for that experience. And I know they have the Signature series, but maybe they need to have their own branded device.
Well, they do, right? I mean, they do.
No, I'm talking about like a laptop. That's a Microsoft laptop.
Well, okay. Obviously, the Surface line is going to expand next year. And so, I wouldn't be surprised to see a Surface device that has a clip-on actual keyboard instead of a keyboard, a keyboard cover, like a type cover, or just a laptop, an Ultrabook type computer. I think we will see that. I talked to the guys who run the Microsoft Store and also do Signature, and I said, it's funny, but the way the world's going, you may find yourself, you meaning the Microsoft Store, may find yourself being the primary distribution point for PCs. And the relationship you have with these PC makers may be reversed, where you used to have to rely on them to get the product out into the world, and now they will rely on you to get their product out into the world. And won't that be an interesting little turnaround for Microsoft, that they can then set the standard back to the PC maker, which frankly is something I think that needs to happen. The PC makers obviously have been good for Microsoft, but they also have screwed the consumers over with these terrible, crapware and awful configurations. And I think things could change. I think things will change, and we'll see. It's too bad that Microsoft didn't get it right with the first Surface,
But I mean, did they get it wrong? I mean, did they get it wrong with the Surface, or was it just a version 1 device? And much like every other version 1 device, it's not everything you wanted, and the second one fixes the problems.
No, they got it wrong.
Okay.
It's just wrong. It's very clear to me now that Windows RT is wrong. It's
interesting.
Wrong. Yeah,
it's really interesting. Another one, and I'm sure this is going to be a big discussion for us, is Intel. Paul, when I saw you wrote Intel and then you put Microsoft next to it, I was thinking, well, did Intel really get it wrong? What did they do wrong? And I started thinking back about all those promises for a faster, lighter, more of a mobile chipset to compete with ARM, and they did virtually nothing.
You know what bugs me about Intel? Obviously, they're the big microprocessor company on the PC side. But all of the big innovations of the past decade or more have come from other companies when it comes to chipsets and microprocessors. I think it's fair to assume that these things will get denser and smaller, and that that's what happens. Kind of a Moore's law type thing. But it was AMD that innovated with the 64-bit chipset that we now call x64. And it was ARM and the other kind of mobile companies that have been pushing mobile computing, which is the wave of the future. And so Intel dominates in the PC space, but that is about to become the smallest of the three main markets that make up general purpose computing. And when you look at the other two markets, the big ones, smartphones and tablets, Intel is almost non-existent. And they'll probably do what I would call pull an Intel and come back from behind and seize a big part of that market. But ultimately, they're pretty disappointing.
But why? I mean, why did they fall behind? I mean, that's the fascinating story. Why in 2012?
They always do this. It's like the core processor that came out of Israel was some Hail Mary pass because all they were doing was megahertz, big dumb processors, And then they finally, they switched over to this core chipset that now they've been milking for, I don't know, a decade or more. I don't even remember anymore. But, the AMD 64 stuff, same thing. Intel was pushing Itanium, which a lot of people called, Itanic.
And the problem with it, the problem with AMD was that they did not do the core chipsets as efficiently as Intel did.
No, but they could look at AMD is another disaster.
I mean, you talk about a disaster of a company. I was an AMD user from the Pentium 3 era to about 2 years ago, and I stuck with AMD, and I liked it. They were cheap, they were fast, they were hot. The chipsets got really hot, but they work well.
Somebody asked if Microsoft built x64 and AMD to scare Intel into action. No, actually. Dave Cutler, chipset, and NT guru, looked at this and said, "This is it. We're doing it." He hated Itanium. He thought that stuff was crap. They had looked at a bunch of 64-bit chipsets. Remember, Digital had their Alpha chipset and so forth. Microsoft did a lot of 64-bit ports. Saw x64, AMD 64 at the time, and said, "Yep, this is it." And they basically forced Intel to adopt it. It was one of those rare moments where Intel actually just had to make a copy of it and build it into their chips, and there was no way around it. Microsoft was doing it. And, Microsoft is doing the same thing to Intel now with ARM, and just saying, look, we got to get Windows onto devices. If we don't, Windows goes away.
What's Intel's mobile chipset right now?
Well, they have the Clover Trail stuff, which is the low-end ARM type thing.
But that's the Atom stuff, right?
Oh, right. And then you're talking about for phones.
Yeah, what do they have for phones?
I think it is Atom. I think it's Atom-based is what they're pushing.
And who's adapting that? I can't. I mean, I don't know why. I can't think of anything.
I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when I mentioned the Steve Jobs book. Steve Jobs wanted to use the Atom processor in the iPad.
Can you imagine what that would have been?
Yeah. Well, right.
I mean, just imagine if that had the Intel chipset. It would have been this big, gigantic thing, like that prototype we saw in the Samsung lawsuit.
Oh, there would have been hot air blowing out of the bottom of it. It would have been. Everywhere. It would have been terrible. Right.
So many fans, it's lifting off the ground. It would have been a feature.
They were right not to use it. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. So, Intel is one of those companies like Microsoft where they're kind of old school. They're kind of slow moving. They're standing on a precipice right now. The world is changing, and I don't really. I have to say, barreling into the end of 2012, I'm not really impressed with where they're at. Obviously, ARM is not there for Windows, but that's like a first-gen issue. Microsoft has taken something really big and heavy and ported it down to what is basically a smartphone chipset. And surprise, surprise, it doesn't run really well. I mean, that shouldn't shock anyone.
What's not running? Windows? You mean Windows?
RT.
Windows RT.
Yeah.
I mean,
because it's a big thing.
How unstable is? I mean, you're saying it doesn't run well. I'm just curious.
No. It's not unstable or unreliable. It's just a big, heavy system running on a low resources type of platform. It's just it will get there, but it may not matter because I think the way that Intel has done things historically is they've seen how the market is getting ready to leave them behind, and then they kind of catch up. And so, we'll see. There's, as people are mentioning in the chat, there's some interim stuff coming, lower wattage versions of the Ivy Bridge chipset that are coming. So forth.
Intel,
that stuff's important.
I mean, last week we spoke about how Intel is looking to create a new type of chipset that's not socket based. It's I think it's a ball grid array, which is it's soldered onto the board. And if you read that article, and I went back to it after we spoke about it last week, because a lot of people were saying, "Oh my God, what am I going to do? I can't change my CPU." They're still going to offer you the big, whatever bulky i7s that you put on, but this is going to be this is going to be an in between. Like if you're buying a desktop, like from Dell. And it's one of these, smaller tower-based ones. You're never going to change a chipset on that thing.
No. Let's turn the discussion to World War II as we must, because what Intel is the United States military, right? It's in many ways, it's now I think is making the transition, but for many, many years it was building up to fight the next World War II, right? Humongous ships, planes and big things, and the battle that they were going to fight was against terrorists. It was against people that melded into the population that didn't look like an army. You're not facing another one of you. You're facing something different. And Intel is like that. It's like this giant, big, heavy thing that is geared up for a world that is increasingly not mattering anymore. The world of big, heavy servers, the world of big, heavy PCs.
It's amazing.
It's a different fight.
Yeah, it's amazing how that's changing. You brought up World War II, and I'm totally going to go on this off-track thing now. And I apologize to the viewers because actually they like the World War II stuff, so I don't apologize. You'll enjoy this.
Doesn't?
On Showtime, there's a great series, Oliver Stone's Untold History of the United States. And I know a lot of people don't like Oliver Stone. And I think he gets a little nutty with this stuff, but it is a really good series so far.
Yeah, I've watched parts of it. I watched the Japanese World War II part, for example.
Okay, so I guess the two episodes ago.
By the way, this stuff is not actually untold. It's just that
it's not what you learn in school.
Yeah, it's he has not uncovered anything new.
No,
right?
not, I mean, you're not going to learn that there were secret agreements happening. It just things that are not traditionally taught to you when you're going to school about World War II, because we've discussed this. I come from the New York City public school system, and we've learned. We entered World War II. We saved the war. If it wasn't for us, Europe would have been devastated. We would have been finished. And and then here's the Reagan era. We totally forget everything in between. But one interesting thing was he spoke about how the British Empire fell apart, and that it was single-handedly because the U.S. kind of made this agreement with England, saying we're not going to enter the war and we're not going to help you if you don't dissolve this, the colonies that you have.
This was true with France as well. I mean, there was a big assumption with this is talk about like old school countries, in this case, wanting things to go back to the way they were when the world has moved on. France wanted to retain its empire as well, even though they capitulated in some kind of record time. And Britain, of course, wanted to maintain its empire as well after the war was over. But, World War II, it was a war. It was a big change. And so they actually retained parts of their empire, but that was not the beginning of the end, but that was probably, the big drop off, obviously, for them.
Yeah. So if anybody's a fan of this stuff, definitely watch it.
Watch it. It's got a very biased viewpoint.
Yeah.
Most of the assertions are correct, but they're also, it's presented in a very
what's interesting, and you could see his opinion being far more visible as the years go on rather than early on. Like when
this is the magic bullet JFK guy, when in fact what happened to JFK is not only easily understood, it is in fact patently obvious, but whatever. Yeah,
but listen, I love this stuff. I love alternate history stuff. I love the whole notion that what if this didn't happen, this could
I guess my problem is, like, I actually know most of this stuff already, so he's presenting it like they didn't tell you that, Japan was going to surrender anyway, and that we didn't have to drop nuclear bombs on them. And, like everything else in life, it's a little more nuanced than that. It's a bit cheap to suggest that, the United States dropped nuclear bombs on Japan just to test them out, which is basically what he says. Like it's kind of crazy. I mean, obviously that was a controversial decision no matter how you slice it. But I mean, it's worth watching. I just feel like it's presented like one of those awful reality shows we have on TV today, where it's like, you didn't know that your government was secretly doing this. Well, they were, and it's like, well, actually, I did know that.
I was watching it, and my wife and I had a couple bottles of wine while we were watching. And later that night, I was sitting in a corner watching Oppenheimer's famous, speech about "I am the destroyer of worlds." I'm like, you are the destroyer of worlds. It's a lot of fun.
There's a lot of.
I get really into
there's
it.
There's a lot of excellent stuff about World War II that is just goes contrary to the grain of what you would expect. For example, I remember one of the big things growing up, when you learn about World War II, is like, we had a hard time fighting the Japanese because they were at home in these jungles in Asia. And it's like, no, they weren't.
No.
The Japanese lived on a tiny island that didn't have a single tree on it because it was the most populated country on earth. Like, they were no more at home in the jungles of Southeast Asia than we were. I mean, they just were fighting there before we were. That's all.
What I learned, actually, I would love to, and a viewer sent us a great book I have here, the Guns of Normandy, that I'm reading now. I have it on my shelf. And I would love to get a book about the Russian side of it.
Oh. So actually, one of the next books I'm going to read, I believe it's called The Iron Curtain. And it's not about the Russian part of World War II, but it's about what Russia did to Eastern Europe right after World War II.
Yeah,
because
which is very fascinating.
In the same, so and it's one of those things we just don't know a lot about. I don't know a lot about. In the same sense that the British and French empires were on the wane because of World War II, obviously the Soviet Empire was just beginning, and that was also something that came out of World War II. So they had a plan to take over a lot of Eastern Europe, which they did. So I want to read more about that. I don't know a lot about that.
Yeah. And again, sorry, guys, we went on this off-track discussion about World War II, but I had to bring it up because it's something that we always discuss here. But before we continue, Paul, do you want to do your Audible pick of the week? Because I actually love this pick that you have. Sure. I'm a big fan of the TV show.
Yeah.
And
I am too. And
a huge fan. I mean, I haven't seen this week's episode, by the way. I just watched last week's.
So I'm still catching up on the. Let me get to that. So the show is Dexter. It's on Showtime, and I watched the first season many years ago, probably when it was first on, by myself because I didn't think my wife would be interested in a show about a serial killer. I thought it was excellent. I mean, the first season to me was amazing, and I later went. I had a hard time getting into the second season for whatever reason, but then I went back and started watching it a few years ago, and it was so good that I stopped partway through, and I said to my wife, "Listen, you need to watch this show. I know it sounds terrible. Just give it a chance." And we're actually both really hooked on it. So for the current season, we actually just subscribed to Showtime so we could watch this and Homeland.
Both great shows.
Yeah, both probably this
month. This is from the official Dexter soundtrack.
Yeah. It's a very high quality show, and every year they have on one or two guest stars.
Oh, phenomenal! Yeah,
they're always excellent. It's Stevenson,
John Lithgow.
Ray Stevenson. Ray Stevenson is this year. Yeah, John Lithgow was one of the best.
He was great. He
might have been the best one of all.
I've never seen someone. I've never seen someone use the C word so articulately.
Yeah, Jimmy Smits was amazing. That guy was great. Yeah. Maybe season 3 or 4. I don't remember anymore. But it's getting a bit much. I mean, as the show goes on, it's like, it gets a bit much. But my wife and I were actually we're now catching it up to the show on demand. So we're on the current season, and I actually we pause it and we talk about this, and we're trying to understand where the show's going, and and I said, it's interesting. These shows were based on a book, and I've never read any of the books. I wonder if they're any good. I burned through a lot of it. I'm about 30% of the way through, but the first one is called Darkly Dreaming Dexter, and it is the first in a series of books by Jeff Lindsay. It is excellent, and the Audible version is read by the author and is unabridged, which is always good.
7 hours, so it's unabridged, but it's not super long.
They're not huge books. They're in other words, it's not a Stephen King 45-hour, The Stand or whatever, but this is it's really, really good. It's interesting too if you're into the show to see how different it is in some ways too, right? Because a lot of it is exactly the same as you would expect.
Now, how many books were there? How many Dexter books?
I actually don't know.
Because I remember reading that it ended in season 2. Like, only the first 2 seasons were based on the book.
Oh, is that true?
I could be wrong. I mean, I remember that. Someone might have told me that. I could have been hallucinating it. Who knows? But that's what I thought.
Yeah, I mean, there are at least there are at least 5 or 6 of them.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if there aren't more. I don't know if he's not doing them anymore or if he's not alive or whatever. I mean, they're recent. I mean, they're not. Let me look them up.
No, I'm totally wrong. There's 6 of them.
Actually, there's a new one coming out next year.
So, is there? Okay.
Yeah, the first one, the book I'm recommending, Darkly Dreaming Dexter, the first one came out in 2004. And there are now 6 of them. Yep, and the 7th one is coming out in 2013.
Very, very cool pick. I'm actually, I'm a big fan of this, and I'm a big fan of Audible, but I never thought about getting the book and listening to it. I don't know why. When I saw it, I'm like, wow, that's actually a really interesting pick. And it could be your pick, too. If you go to audiblepodcast.com, you see how I crowbar that in? audiblepodcast.com/Andrew. You can sign up and get your free audiobook today. And if you're a subscriber of Audible, definitely check it out because I love watching a TV show or a movie and then, reading it afterwards because you'll always be disappointed if you read the book before. And I'm curious on how this is going to work.
I like doing it, the opposite way because obviously the book will almost always build on what's in the book. So it's kind of a nice way to do it.
Very, very cool pick, Paul. I really like this one. But to continue our rant on what we hated in 2012.
No, not what we hated.
Okay, the worst of 2012. Yeah. The biggest fails, blunders, disappointments of 2012 in technology. You had one here that I actually was interested in. It was the Barnes & Noble Nook because there was such high hopes in 2011 for this thing. It was going neck and neck with Amazon, and Amazon, with this last version of the Kindle, totally blew right past them.
Yeah, it's weird because the Nook has, as a hardware device, has and probably still does exceed the Kindle devices in some ways, right? They're higher resolution, lower cost even in some cases. It's not the device, it's really the platform which has kind of failed. So as something that makes money, the Nook has never taken off. It's been dragging on Barnes & Noble. They talked about plans to spin it off. They partnered with Microsoft after having a very long-running lawsuit that was going to end up in a court case. And they settled, and they're still putting out these Android things. There was some kind of hope that maybe there would be like a Windows RT type, Microsoft tie-in or whatever. That hasn't happened, and I just think that I don't think that the world needed, say, iBooks or certainly Google Books, but I think those things being tied to the platforms on which they run and Amazon just being so dominant has basically conspired. And I really feel like this is not the beginning. I keep saying the beginning and the end. It's not the beginning. We're at this point where I think Barnes & Noble is in serious trouble and that they're going to go the way of CompUSA.
As far as
it's kind of a set.
As far as the brick and mortar.
I give them credit for making go with it with Nook because the one advantage they have and have had is that people can go into the store and see the devices. But if you've been in a Barnes & Noble recently, you know that it's, aside from the sadness of it, it's like 50% of it is now like a storefront for the Nook.
But nobody's buying anything. We have literally down the block from me, 3 blocks away, we have a really nice Barnes & Noble with a Starbucks, and it's in a beautiful shopping center. But nobody's ever buying anything in there.
I went in. Yeah, my wife and I went into one a few weekends ago, and it's sad. I mean, we went into there was a Borders was like that before it closed too. I mean, I had always wanted a good bookstore in Dedham, and we finally got one in Borders. It was there for all of 6 months, maybe, and I felt bad because by the time it came, I rarely wanted to even go in a bookstore. And when I did go in a bookstore, I might buy a magazine. I would certainly get some coffee, but I would never buy a book. And, of course, Borders sold these awful off-market kind of e-readers at the time.
Yeah. But I mean, it still says
by the way,
something.
Just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with the Nook. I know there are people who are fans of it, and they're going to take this the wrong way. I just feel like it's been a failure. And
Well, I
think
mean,
it's
Amazon. I mean, the thing about Barnes and Noble is that they're only a bookstore. With Amazon,
Yep.
they were a bookstore and they adapted, and now they sell
Well,
everything.
actually,
And you're involved in that. You're in the environment. You're in the ecosystem of Amazon.
Yeah, I've been meaning to write this up, but the thing that Amazon has that no one else has, and that includes Apple and Google, who also sell books and other things, is that those other companies are basically promoting a hardware platform. And that's why they have these services. The services exist to support the hardware platform. I actually don't believe that Amazon cares whether the Kindle sells at all. That as a device, what they care about is that Kindle platform, which is not just the Kindle stuff, but also the other Amazon apps and services and so forth. That their goal is to get that thing on everything. That Kindle will be successful no matter what devices people are buying.
Yeah.
Because you can run that Kindle app anywhere. And obviously, there's a Nook app too. But I mean, but the Nook is obviously just about Barnes and Noble and selling books, and it's about those devices.
Well, you can tell they don't care about the hardware because the first generation Kindle Fire got 0 updates.
Right. I mean, because the types of people who would buy a Kindle Fire are people who knit and people who carpool, and they're not technology enthusiasts. I mean, they sell these things to normal people, and Amazon has a huge advantage over not just over Barnes and Noble, but these other ecosystems because the iBookstore never has to be like a profit generator for Apple. They're going to keep it going because it's part of the reason you buy an iPad, and iPads make a lot of money for Apple. Amazon comes it from the opposite direction.
But again, but Apple has the same exact thing. They have an ecosystem, and that's the App Store. They have their app bookstore, they have their music, video, and applications, and they make their money from their store. That it's really they're selling these
Barnes
devices.
and Noble is done nothing but lose money on the Nook, and they just don't have the
how is Google
the wherewithal to.
How is Google doing with their ecosystem?
Well, I think they're approaching it the way that Apple is. It doesn't really matter, It just needs to. It just needs to be there to support the system that does mean something to them, which is Android.
Yeah.
I don't think they care. I just don't think they care.
Another thing on our list is console gaming, and I'm curious about this, Paul, because you're a big console gamer, and 2012 showed to be a record year for games sold for the console.
I don't think so.
Well, no. The last, I think Halo had a record amount of sales, and
yeah, but video game sales or year over year, every month have been down from the previous year. I put a question mark after this one.
Okay.
Last week I mentioned that PC gaming has probably run its course. Console gaming is a much bigger deal than PC gaming, but console gaming is also getting killed, and it's getting killed by the touch devices, by iPod touches, by iPads, by iPhones, and by other smartphones, because people are finding ways to play games in off times, and they play different kinds of games, because they maybe they're commuting and that kind of thing. So I think that there will always be a place for all of these types of games. I mean, certain types of games will do well in the PC. Certain types of games will do well in the console. But the big market is not. It's not a console. It's not a PC. It's going to be these devices. It's going to be the web. It not going to be is today. Microsoft announced this year, for example, that people on Xbox spend more time not playing games than they do playing games. So, I mean, there you go. So, again, I specifically said console gaming, and I put a question mark on it.
But not the console itself, because there is hope.
The consoles, they're going to continue. There will be another Xbox, and it will be a set-top box. It's going to be it's going to be Windows RT in your living room kind of thing. I mean, it's going to be that's going to be the story there.
But I mean, that's just another market that Microsoft could really dominate in, and it's something that they've attempted multiple times, and they've not been able to do it with web TV. They couldn't do it. The whole media center.
Yeah. But how big is that market? I mean, how many Xbox 360s has Microsoft sold ever since 2005? What's the total number? You can go to Wikipedia and look at the number.
What's
80 million?
I thought it was more.
It's 80 million or less. No, it's less. It's 80 million or less.
Okay. Let's see.
So
Let's see. Xbox 360 sales.
No, just go to Wikipedia, type in Xbox 360. On the right, it says worldwide 70 million as of September 30th. So it's probably high. It's probably, it's going to be higher than that today, obviously. So it's less than 80. How many iPads do they sell in a year?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I mean, how many smartphones are sold?
But I mean, that could potentially change if.
It's
but you
never
also have to look at it.
much.
But
That's
the
problem.
Xbox,
I mean,
the Xbox is marketed as a gaming platform. That's who buys it. You don't buy an Xbox if you want a media center. You don't. It was never.
No, but that's my point. My point is, as a game machine, this thing has a very limited reach.
No, you're absolutely right.
Relatively speaking, Microsoft sold 40 million licenses for Windows 8 in 1 month, and it is described as a disaster. So, in approximately 2, 3, 4 months, they're going to have as many copies of that thing in the market as Microsoft has had of the Xbox 360 in 7 years. These are not comparable. It's not a big market.
No, it's not a big market at all.
That's all I'm saying. So for Microsoft to do better with the next Xbox, this thing has to do more than just play games. And that's my point. In other words, it's not the Xbox is dead. It's not that, consoles are going away. It's that these things need to become general purpose entertainment devices for them to be interesting and even still, I mean, even if this thing sells, what if the next one sells like twice that, 3 times that? Is that still that good?
Well, look at this. PlayStation, the PlayStation 3 has sold 70 million consoles, and the PlayStation 2 has sold 153 million.
Yeah.
Nearly double the price. If it wasn't for the Blu-ray player on this PlayStation 3, I don't think they would have been near that number.
Sure.
I think that was a huge selling point for many people. They just sold 500,000 PlayStation 3s on Black Friday because it's a Blu-ray player. So they have to kind of adapt to this, and obviously they want it in everybody's living room. Both Sony and Xbox and Microsoft, but I think Microsoft has the advantage because they kind of understand how to create software. Sony doesn't.
By the way, the other big difference that's going to occur with the next generation of consoles, especially the Microsoft one, is that it's going to be more of a microtransaction kind of thing, like a smartphone or an iPad. I mean, I think one of the nice things about an iPad from the perspective of the platform is that its users are sitting there on the couch or on a train or wherever they are, and they can download free apps. They can download really cheap apps, and it's kind of a no-brainer. Xbox 360, like $60 for a new game. You got to go to a store. You got to buy a disc. You got to plug it into your console. It's a real old-fashioned way of doing things, and I think that aspect of it has to change as well. That probably has contributed to the fact that it's not, just not a big market, compared to other digital devices.
But also, that those kind of games like downloadable content and simpler games appeals to a whole different group of people. Like me, I stopped playing games a while ago, and it's very difficult for me to pick up a controller and play Call of Duty, at this point because I'm so far behind. The last game that I got for Xbox was Castle Crashers that I downloaded through their service through Xbox Live, and I had a great time playing it.
I spent some time playing games like that this year. There are a bunch of great Xbox Live arcade games.
And if they market this device, let's call it the Xbox Surface for all intended and purposes. If they market this device as, hey, look, we have all these other games on here that you could download from our app store.
Sure.
I think a lot of people are going to want to get this in their living room.
We'll see. I mean, again, there's always going to be this core kind of hardcore gamer market that they prefer PCs because these things can be upgraded and they can have crazy amounts of RAM and super high resolutions and they can tweak and all that kind of stuff. And they feel that kind of thing is superior for whatever reason, even though it's super expensive and inconsistent and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And there are going to be people like me. And there's a pretty big market of these kind of people, like the Call of Duty games. I mean, obviously that thing made like $1 billion in 15 days or whatever the figure is. So obviously there's some money there, but still kind of a limit, on what that market size is. But the big market, the different people, as they were called, is a much bigger market of people that want casual games occasionally, that kind of thing. And we'll see whether that can be as successful in the living room as it has been on mobile devices. We'll see.
So let's do the viewer picks.
Okay.
I had AMD, which we spoke about. I was going to touch on NFC totally being a fail because we heard so much about NFC-enabled devices, and we're just going to go to the store and just hold our phone and be like, oh, my God, look, I just spent $20. And that did not happen.
It will happen. By the way,
happen.
I did not read, but I saw a headline that said Apple set NFC back by 2 years simply by not
adapting it.
it, you know.
So I had that.
Maybe like they did to LTE.
But there were 3 unanimously chosen, I guess, viewer picks that I got on Twitter. Obviously, I got RIM. Many people said RIM. Oh, I had Apple Maps, too, on my list. We all know what happened with that. These 3 surprised me. And one was HP.
Well, that one does not surprise me.
It doesn't surprise me, but I thought they fell apart in 2011, not 2012.
Yeah, okay.
I guess HP has not been able to. I thought HP was going to be the, I guess, MacBook Pro competitor for Windows 8 devices. I mean, they were going to be this, they would have.
By the way, they may still be. Have you seen that new device that's coming out next year?
Oh, they have beautiful one, the Elite series. They have beautiful laptops, but I just feel they're not marketing it properly, or people aren't really talking about it, or maybe the PC market doesn't want to spend $1,200 every time they buy a laptop. I mean,
well, more like 15 or 18.
Or 15 or 18. Okay, yeah.
For those machines. But yeah, that's the problem.
HP was on there, which was fascinating. But the other 2, I was surprised when I read this.
I don't get these 2.
One was the iPhone 5, and one was the iPad mini. And I got a lot of messages from people, and I honestly thought it was the whole, well, there's many viewers that we have that are Microsoft fans, and they like Windows Phone, and they hate all things Apple. But it wasn't that. A lot of it was...
Okay, what was it?
One was, with the iPad mini, everybody complained that it doesn't have a Retina screen. It doesn't have Retina, it doesn't have Retina.
Super obvious. But did those people use an iPad mini? I mean, I don't... It's clear that next year there will be a Retina version of this.
And guess what? There'll be a non-Retina version also.
I don't understand. I think it's fine. Again, this is the argument I had with Windows Phone when it was 800 by 480, and people are like, oh no, you don't understand. No, you don't understand. It looks great. It just looks fine. A Windows Phone running at 800 by 480 today looks fine, and this iPad Mini running at 1024 by 768. I mean, sorry, it looks fine.
You know what's fascinating?
Obviously, the Retina one will be great, but
I'll tell you what's really interesting. And I'm an Apple user, guys. We all know. I'm sorry, but I use a MacBook Pro as my everyday computer. Why?
You have an Apple logo as a tattoo, don't you?
I do, but I can't show you guys where it is. Okay, I'll tell you. It's right on my hip bone. I have a nice Apple logo, and it says Max Rule Windows Drools. Right
Windows Drools, yeah. Yep.
By the way, that's actually I got that in as an email a couple of years ago. That's all the email said. Max Rule Windows Drools.
He made his point. I don't really see any reason to elaborate on it. So.
I said, you're right, sir. I'm sorry. But I come from, I'm an Apple user. I have Windows computers all around me, obviously. But one thing that baffles me, and you pointed this out, and I found it to be such the epitome of hypocrisy and how we just totally ignore certain things just because we like it. The screen resolution on the 13-inch MacBook Pro is awful.
Well, it was. So they fixed it. Yeah. For a long time.
But for a long time. I mean, you're talking about for years.
Several years. Yep.
Where on the MacBook Air, it had a higher resolution screen. I never heard one person scream about this. One person complain until you pointed it out to me and you said, dude, the resolution is really low on this 13-inch MacBook Pro.
I never got that. Like, I always thought that thing should have had a higher resolution.
And so nobody complained.
Buy like this computer. It was like more expensive, thicker, heavier, and it had a low resolution screen. It's like, what the? It's just funny.
But we're complaining about a first-generation iPad Mini having a non-Retina screen, and I understand that. Listen, but we also have to understand that Apple's model now is Retina, non-Retina for every platform. That's what they're doing.
The only thing I could say about both these devices that is potentially a legitimate complaint is that the iPhone 5 and the iPad Mini are both reactions to industry forces that occurred outside of Apple.
Okay, so we're talking about larger screens, higher resolution
screens in the case of the iPhone, and then I guess smaller devices in the case of the tablet. And these are examples of where their competitors were kind of eating Apple's lunch, and Apple felt like they had to, get in there. That said, I can't agree that these things would ever possibly even be included on a worst of 2012 list. I would not include them on the best of list either, but neither one of them is a failure in any way at all. I
don't think so at all either. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just don't agree with it, I guess.
The complaints for the iPhone 5 were interesting, and it was more of a iOS 6 complaint than iPhone 5, and I think it's been the same problem that we've discussed all year. I think Android has matured to the point where iOS 6 is feeling dated.
Oh, yeah.
And I believe that's the big complaint that people have with this, other than the Retina complaint for the iPad mini. But this is something interesting that we're going to look into 2013, because if Apple doesn't change iOS 6 in 2013, they possibly could have a huge problem on their hands for, within the next 18 months.
So I actually expect to see an iOS UI, or I guess user experience revolution next year. I believe that because Johnny Ive is in charge of iOS design now, that this thing will become beautiful and distinct. And so that actually, to be honest, is potentially the biggest competitive threat to Windows Phone imaginable, because the guy who made all that hardware that we all have agreed, and no one has ever offered up any argument otherwise, is just universally excellent.
Beautiful devices.
Is now going to be doing the software. And so, he has a problem with that kind of Steve Jobs style skeuomorphic design baloney where it looks like a fake fabric, or the calendar looks like a paper calendar.
It's awful, that
kind of stupid crap that Apple does now. That's going to go away. And so that could make iOS, which today, like you said, is the stalest, most awful, old-fashioned thing in the world, suddenly very interesting again. So I'm going to be watching that very carefully. I'm very, very curious to see any hints of that stuff.
Yeah, and listen, or people say like, well, Android is the enthusiast phone. I think Android is overly complicated and I think overly redundant with the same button doing 15 things. I hate that little, there's a 3-dot button, and it's like,
button. That's the backwards compatibility button.
Yes, the 3-dot button.
I
absolutely hate that, because I hit that all the time with my finger, and it pulls up this weird affected screen. There's
I
things
like the menu button. The old menu button I thought was a good idea. I like that.
Like I forgot
the hardware menu button.
I can't.
That's why that's there, because they don't have it anymore.
Like, I don't know if I could show you this screen right here. I don't understand that. Like, I never use that, and it irritates me to have that, because I constantly hit it.
This is the app switcher screen?
Yeah, the app switcher screen. I think it's really dumb. But who knows? Maybe that's
my son is using that phone that you just showed is the Nexus one, right?
Yeah.
My son's using that now, and he took him one day. He came home and he said, the battery life on this thing is terrible. I was like, "Yep, welcome."
You want to hear how terrible?
Welcome to
it
LTE, I should say.
So we did about an hour. The show's been in about an hour. I was at a full charge when we started the show. I just unplugged it. I'm at about 85%.
Sure.
And I haven't touched the phone at all. It's just been sitting here. Another big disappointment for me for 2012, and then we could wrap it up, was battery technology. We didn't see an improvement as far as battery technology goes. We did see devices like the Note 2 get gigantic, 28 milliamp batteries that could possibly last you a whole day. But in reality, all these other devices, the battery technology did not get better. We're just putting bigger batteries in these things. And I really would like to see that change in 2013.
I mean, obviously the move to ARM on the Windows side was around that, and Clover Trail, those devices get really good battery life, and so we're getting there. But yeah, I'd like to. Honestly, the biggest success of the iPhone, I've often said, somewhat sarcastically, but really, was it got people to stop thinking that their phone needed to last more than half of a day. Like the fact that everyone accepted the fact that this thing needed to be plugged in constantly.
Yeah.
Was like the one hump that people just leapt into, rather than complain about it. But the battery life on that stuff has gotten a lot better than it was in the beginning too. But yeah, you're right. It didn't. This year won't go down in history as the year that battery life was solved. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I think 2013 and I guess the next 2 years, it's going to be this huge revolution of better battery technology. I was reading this article on Reddit the other day, and it was about how a lot of it has to do with the coating of the battery on the inside, and the coating being eroded over time. And that's why it loses a lot of the charge. It can't hold a charge as efficiently as it can. And
that doesn't even sound slightly dangerous.
No. And what they've done now is in Israel, they've developed a way for the coating not to be eroded, therefore letting it hold a better charge. So when your battery at first, like the problem with batteries is, when you first get it, it's great. The battery works. And then after like 2 years, it doesn't hold a charge as well as it used to. They're coming with better ways to do that. But then, the manufacturers want to sell batteries. So that's also another issue. So do they want to put this technology in there? Who knows? But again, guys, if you have anything that we miss, I definitely want to hear your feedback. Send us an email, guysfromqueens@gmail.com. We do have internet in Queens. I don't care what Leo Laporte tells you. We do have internet. And I have
a foot of water in the basement, but we do have internet.
Yeah. There's people on a treadmill in my basement actually powering my house here in Queens. It's actually how we do electricity here, Paul. I don't know if you know that.
Gerbils.
And gerbils. Or people. I just hire people and I just tell them to run. But send us an email, guysfromqueens@gmail.com. I want to hear what you guys thought was the worst for 2012. It's always great getting these emails. And you guys are great with emails because you guys send me like 3-page emails. And I sit there and I read it. I'm like, you know what? I agree with him. Or I'm like, this guy's insane. And it brings, provides me with material for the show. Paul's website, winsupersite.com, is where you could get all things Paul Thurrott. Paul does a great show on some other network with some other guy. I believe that's what he said about me. Windows Weekly with Mary Jo Foley and, of course, Leo Laporte. You can catch that every Thursday at 2 p.m. East. Where Leo calls me sluts and tells me to leave the chat room.
Yep.
So you could check that out too. And we're going to be back next week with the best of 2012. And definitely send your suggestions because a lot of good stuff happened this year. Between Android making a decent Android tablet, Windows Phone 8 coming out, which I think Windows Phone 8 is a great platform.
Yep.
Is Windows 8 the best? Does Windows 8 fall under best of 2012? You guys let us know. And we'll definitely talk about it.
By the way, we did not mention it under the worst.
No, we didn't. I don't think it's the worst.
We complained about the PC makers. Yeah. I think they, clearly botched it up. But yeah,
I think the software is great. I think the OEMs totally dropped the ball on this. But let's see what you guys think. And that's it for this week. Paul, that was a good show. You did a really good job.
Thank you. It's your feedback is important to me, Andrew.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you. And yours as well. I welcome it. We'll see you all next week, guys. Good night. Next week, guys. Good night.